Hello everybody, and welcome to today's presentation, How to A/B Test Every Feature Release, brought to you by Split Software. I'd like to introduce you to our presenters. Jason Miyasota is the Senior Director of Demand and Growth Marketing at Split Software. Trevor Stuart is the Head of Product at Split Software, and Kevin Lee is a Solutions Architect at Split Software. I'm going to turn things over to Jason to begin the presentation. Jason?
Thanks, Ryan. So in this webinar, we're going to highlight the evolution of software development and why it's important to have comprehensive measurement in your CI/CD process. We'll also talk about how many solutions fall short in providing insights on every feature release. And lastly, we'll have a technical information on how Split works with a live demo by Kevin. With that, I'll turn it over to Trevor Stuart.
How's it going? One of the co-founders here at Split and focus on leading our product development efforts. So as Jason just talked through, we're going to talk through a few different things. One is the evolution of the industry. The other is just understanding the tools we're using today and how that impacts experimentation. And then really just look at two case studies. One is more popular and more notorious, and one you've never heard of because it's a case study that we recently ran on our own user base. So first, we're going to quickly talk about some of the industry trends that we're all really cognizant of and aware of. And the first one is just engineering development velocity is ever increasing. So if you look in the 1990s, Microsoft was shipping software every few years. In the 2000s, we saw Salesforce come to market and start shipping software twice a year. Today, peak performers like Netflix and LinkedIn are delivering hundreds of times, if not thousands of times a day. Now, with that change, we've seen a change in the way product teams operate. So for those of us that have been in the industry longer, we're familiar with these concepts of waterfall releases, but today those are now more familiarized as MVP-based development. We used to spend hours writing product requirement doc and sending that over the wall. Today it's a feedback cycle based on rapid iteration with a lot of data coming in to understand how customers are using our product, giving us that rapid iteration and that customer feedback cycle. Such that today, product development is now a continuous set of joint experiments between product and engineering teams. And in this new process, measurement is paramount. So if we take a look here, Microsoft today runs thousands of experiments per year. And at Microsoft, it is not uncommon to see an experiment that can impact annual revenue by millions of dollars, and sometimes this impact is actually measured in the tens of millions of dollars. But this measurement extends far beyond the first order. It's not just about revenue, it's those first, second, and third order metrics that also have a big impact. So if you take a step back and look at Microsoft, they run a scenario every year where they do fail day, and they go through and they slow down their servers and their machines to understand the impact that it can have on their customer base and therefore on the customer experience and revenue. And in one of those experiments that they ran, they were able to understand that a Bing engineer that improved server performance by 10 milliseconds, that's 1/30th of the speed at which our eyes blink, can more than pay for their fully loaded annual costs. So this really helps us tie back how our engineering and product efforts, something as small as performance, can have such a dramatic impact on a business's top line. Now, today everything can be measured. So for those of us on this call who have used many different tools, we may be using tools like New Relic. You may be using tools like Pendo for some of your customer analytics. Or maybe you're using an Amplitude for product analytics. Maybe you're doing billing information in Zuora, or you're using Zendesk for customer support. So today, everything can be measured. There's a lot of tools on the market that allow us to get that information and get that product telemetry. But understanding the causal impact requires tools that focus on experimentation. And this is our dashboard, which Kevin will walk into later. But I want to quickly talk through a few of these tools and how they can help you with the concepts of experimentation, can help you understand the impact when you segment out and roll out features across your customer base. So if you use tools like Zuora, you can start to understand how the trial to paid conversion rates will fluctuate for users that are exposed to a particular treatment versus another variant or another treatment. If you use tools like Pendo, you can run surveys, you can look at NPS scores, or even you can just use their feature tracking software to really understand how customers engaged with the piece of functionality that you released to maybe 20, 30, 40, 50% of your customers. If you're using New Relic, you can use their Insights tool to understand some of those real user monitoring metrics and those browser monitoring metrics around page load times and really understand what Microsoft looked to understand, which is if you slow down the website, how does that impact the higher order metrics? So you can really start to understand that initial page load time can have a significant impact. So you can measure that across customers who are exposed to different pieces of functionality. You can use amplitude, similar to Pendo, but more focused on those product analytics metrics, those behavioral analytics, to understand how users are creating or taking actions within your product. And the last one here is Zendesk, and you can tie back those support tickets, which is something we like to do here at Split. When we roll out a piece of functionality to a subset of our customer base, we like to understand whether they are filing support tickets, whether we've introduced a layer of confusion, if there's bugs, if there's anything that could be drawing back on that customer experience. So I want to take 2 seconds and just dive into 2 quick examples. The first, obviously, is a little more popular and a little more famous, but this was Twitter's move to 280 characters. So here's a quick quote from the press release that they put out in their blog. So they said, in September, we launched a test that expanded the character limit from 140 characters so that every person around the world could express themselves easily in a tweet. Their goal was to make this possible while also ensuring that they keep the speed and brevity that makes Twitter Twitter. So 3 primary goals were set out here. The first was, how do we make it easy? How do we make it by making it possible? And how do we focus on speed and brevity? So they looked at a number of different metrics, but the first one here was focusing on how do we make tweeting easier. So they found that 1% of tweeters actually hit the limit, whereas before, when they increased the limit, it was 9%. So 9% of people with 140 characters were hitting the limit, whereas when they increased it, only 1% of tweeters were. Thus, they felt like they were making it easier for people to tweet and removing some of those barriers. But what they didn't see, or what they had hoped they wouldn't see, was that people would just continue to write really long messages. So they found that only 5% actually used the enhanced functionality. So they actually started tweeting more than 140 characters, and only 2% tweeted more than 190 characters. So while they made tweeting easier, they still managed to keep the brevity. And on the last one, they continued to drive engagement. So what they found was that people who had more room to tweet, it actually led to more likes, more retweets, and more mentions. So after letting this experiment run for about a month or so, they then rolled this out to the 100% of their user base. And this was something that was all over the press. You can read about it in their blog. It was a big decision. It was at the core of Twitter. It was at the core of some of their founding principles. Now, if you look at one that we currently have running, this is an example of a split that we currently are running an experiment on. It's a very small visual change, but it drove dramatically different outcomes across our customer base. So in this example, we have 2 treatments. We have a small treatment on the left and a large treatment on the right. And just clicking in here, it's very, very simple. We're just moving the star. We're taking a small star on the left, and we're making it a bigger star on the right. And what we wanted to see when we released this functionality to our customer base is we wanted to understand discoverability as well as engagement. So these are 2 different starring paradigms from actually 2 different software development tools that I'm sure many of you are using. One uses a small star, one uses a large star, and we really just wanted to understand how customers engaged with it. And what we found was, well, the small star, as we could imagine, was actually harder to discover. So fewer users discovered or clicked the star when it was smaller. So percent of users using stars, 13% fewer using small stars, and number of users who had starred was about 18% fewer. But what we found was that they actually engaged with it a lot more. So for those users that had found the small star, they drove up their engagement with that star, and they had a lot more stars. So 54% more stars, they clicked the star 10% more times. They had on average 65% more stars per user, and the number of stars per user with stars increased to over 89%. And so this really helped us understand the discoverability and the re-engagement with something super simple around the basic visualization. And we were able to collect this data, if we go back a few slides, we were able to take this data from the tools that we use today. So we were able to take this data from the tools like Pendo, who we use here at Split, to be able to mesh that data into our experimentation analytics products to segment out our customers who were exposed to these treatments. Now, in the foreground, we also had additional metrics being calculated that were less relevant for this experiment, but we also kept those metrics running, such as page load time or time on site or number of sessions per user. We kept all of those metrics running so that we could understand the impact and make sure that we weren't moving them in a negative way. So all of those metrics continued to run behind Split while the metrics that we cared about for this particular release were analyzed and helped inform our decision to roll this out to 100% of our customers. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Kevin, who's going to give you a quick demo of a little bit more into the Split console of how you would use Split for experimentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Trevor. So that's my face. As everyone mentioned earlier, I'm a solution architect here, so work with a ton of our customers from a customer success perspective, walking through best practices on setting up our platform. And as mentioned earlier, I'll be walking you guys through that demonstration of our product. Now, before we dive in, I find that it's generally helpful just to set the stage really quickly, talk a little bit about how our platform works at a high level and how it works with your product. So within this diagram, you can go ahead and see you've got the Split platform on the right side there. And within that cloud, you can see the management console called out. So basically, our platform works with a web UI that allows any member of your team to go ahead and sign in and set up what we call rollout plans. So saying, for a given feature, I want to be able to separate the concept of code deploy from my feature release and turn that feature on for none of my customers. Turn it on for only 10% of my customers. Maybe have it set so that only my customers in New York are seeing the on version, and maybe I'm running an A/B test against my customers in California, where half of them are seeing on and half of them are seeing off. All that granularity, all that targeting is set directly within our web UI. Now, the way that actually works to control your customer experience is that as you make those changes directly within our platform, all those rollout plans, all that information is automatically synced and downloaded down to our SDKs, which sit at the application layer of your code base. So these are simple packages that you would install into your projects. And what they do for you when you go ahead and start using those SDK clients within your project is that they'll download down all those rollout plans for you and store them down in memory. What that allows for then is for a full in-memory execution at runtime. What you're able to do is say wrap a feature in a simple if-else-if statement, the very simple concept of a feature flag, and say I have an on version and an off version, and I'm going to simply ask the Split SDK at runtime to decide for me which version I should serve up. That SDK will be able to do that in memory on your side because it has the in-memory store of your rollout plans, and will be able to dynamically decide for you, for a given user, what version of that feature they should see. In this manner, you're able to separate that concept of code deploy from your feature release and only have one production branch of code that's dynamically set to serve different versions of your features to different subsets of your customer base. Now, what we're doing on the flip side of that, as we go ahead and serve up those versions of your features, is we capture down that information for you about who's seeing on and who's seeing the off version of your feature. We call those impressions. Those data points simply get passed back up into our platform so that it's very easy to understand within our web UI again now, right? How many people have seen a given version of my feature? How many times have I served up the on version of that feature? What we're also able to do is ingest any generic event data that you might care about, right? As Trevor was talking about, the clicks, the engagement, production KPIs as well in terms of number 500 error or the load time of my application can all be simply pumped into our platform. And within our backend, we're going to automatically join that generic event data directly with that impression data so that we can turn every single feature that you pump into the platform into an experiment where we're automatically going to tell you if a specific feature is impacting any of the given event streams that have come in. So for example, if you're tracking clicks on your homepage, you can go ahead and understand within our platform if the on population for a given feature is seeing more clicks than the off population, and if that difference is statistically significant. Essentially, is there a causal impact that can be attributed to the specific feature that you've rolled out? Now that we've gone through the high-level architecture, what I'll do here, guys, is go ahead and dive into the platform itself. So now what I'm bringing up is the web UI, and what we're currently looking at is the page for a given split within the platform. So a split is that object that represents a code change that you're managing, a rollout plan associated with it, and then how that code change is impacting the metrics that you care about. And so the split that we're currently looking at is one called new onboarding flow. So this is an example where we're rolling out a new onboarding flow for all of our users. So a fairly simple use case and one that we're likely all familiar with. Now, for a given feature that you're rolling out or a given split within the platform, there are two main components of that split. definition and results. Definition simply being the definition of that rollout plan, and the results being how that feature is impacting your metrics. So starting here on the definition side, we can take a quick look here and take a look at how we go ahead and enable all of that targeting for you and your customer base. And so as we take a look here at the first section, you're going to see at the top here is a treatment section. That treatment section is simply where you're able to go ahead and define the two different versions of your feature that the customer might see. In this case, we've defined the feature to have an on and an off version, but you can go ahead and add as many treatments as you want. So if you have different versions or variants of your feature, you can go ahead and define all of those here. Now, below that, you have a number of ways in which to control who can see a given version of your feature. So you can go ahead and whitelist individual customers simply by putting in their ID into a freeform text editor here, and that will automatically tell our SDKs to put those customers into the on version. Or you could say, I have a higher risk customer, go ahead and put them into the off version as well. Down below, you also have the ability via our targeting rules to get much more dynamic with that targeting. So here you can build out if-else-if statements using really any matching criteria that's available to your code at runtime to slice and dice your customer base into different treatment plans. So as an example here, we're targeting by location, and we're saying only for our customers in New York, I want to do an A/B test where half of them will see on, half of them will see off. Our platform takes care of that randomization for you. Now, beyond just targeting by one attribute, I can go ahead and hit this plus icon here and go ahead and add any other dimension that I might want to target by as well. So I could go ahead and say, hey, maybe I want to look at last login as well. And I can also now use a date type matcher and go ahead and say, might want to know if the last login was on or after, just say yesterday. I can go ahead and save, and now I'm slicing and dicing down to a further subset of the customer base. Last piece to call out here is that I can, of course, target by any other attributes that I might want using an else if here to target those different subsets of my customer base with different treatment plans. I'll hop out of this at this point and take a look then at once you've set up a feature to be rolled out, how we're helping you to measure those different components of that feature. So clicking over to the results tab of a given split, we can go ahead and see that the first thing you're going to be able to see visualize is a view of those impressions we were talking about earlier. These impressions are, again, that information about who's seeing the on and who's seeing the off version of your feature. So at the very top here, you're just going to see a graph where that information is all visualized. And then below, you're going to see the aggregated information there around the number of times a given version has been served up, as well as that information there of the unique number of customers that have seen a given version. And then finally, at the very bottom, you have that full raw table available that will go ahead and show you all the times a given version, a given feature, customer has seen a given version of your feature. This is that basis then for measurement, right? We now have that bucketing information available to know who's seen what version of a feature, and we can use this information to really start measuring the effect of a given feature on the metrics that you care about. Now, in terms of that measurement component, the way that works is that our platform also has the ability to go ahead and ingest any events that are occurring within your platform directly into our platform. So what I can click to now is a view of all the event types that have been pumped into this specific instance of Split. So here we can see that full listing out. We have a very simple REST API as well as track methods built directly into our SDK where you can pump these events directly into our platform. And once they show up, you can go ahead and view all of them here. So for example, if we take a look here at one example, maybe on that e-store checkout, right? So if we're just rolling out a feature and we also want to measure if there are any specific events coming through for people checking out, we can see here that there was already an event pumped in. I just did that earlier this morning. You guys can see here, pumped it in at 9:58, and there's just a simple ID, and then that event occurred. What you can do within our platform now is very simply, I can define what we call a new metric. And what this is telling Split is how should our platform go ahead and aggregate and measure this specific event stream for you. In this case, I might care about, for example, the number of checkouts. So I can say the count of checkouts per user. I can describe it, I can then tag it, and within the definition here, I can simply tell the platform how we want to do that aggregation. I can say, do I want an increase or a decrease? I want more checkouts, so I'll say increase. We can do that across or per user. I'll select per. And then obviously I want to select count for this time, but you can see we also have the ability to do a count ratio between two different event streams, a sum of values, average of values, and the percent of unique users that triggered a given event. In this case, I'll select count, and then I'll select that eStore checkout event that I pumped in, and I can go ahead and then hit create. As soon as I've done that, this metric has now been created and will start to be measured automatically by our platform. And the beauty of it is I only need to do this once. When we go back to our new onboarding flow split, we're going to see that this metric has automatically been created, because the way we approach it is that every single event stream is going to be measured across every single split that you set up. So now coming back over here to that new onboarding flow split, what I can do now is click over to metrics, and we're going to be able to go ahead and see the result of our experiment in terms of how this specific feature is impacting all the metrics that we care about. So what we're going to see now is a full metrics dashboard in terms of a comparison where we're showing you how the on population has compared against that baseline of the off population. And within each of these metrics cards, you're just seeing that information where we've joined that impression event stream up against the actual event stream for the things happening within your application, such as tasks being created. And what we're doing is we know who in the on population created tasks and who in the off population created tasks, and we're just simply showing you the percent difference between those two different populations. Now, if we scroll to the bottom here, we can see that that count of checkouts per user has actually already been created as a new metric, as I was talking about. Obviously, it says no data available just because I pumped it in with that dummy ID for an example ID, so there's nothing to map it to. But this just demonstrates that every metric you create gets measured across every single feature. Now, in terms of looking at the other metrics that actually have some data in them, we can see that obviously there's some color coding. So rather than just doing the pure comparison of those populations, what we're doing on top of that is also doing a statistical computation to determine if the difference is truly statistically significant. Essentially, can you determine if this given feature is causing a change in the metric? So anything highlighted here in green or red is where the test that we're running for you is coming back statistically significant. So green meaning that there's a positive change for your business, red meaning that there was a negative change for your business, and that these results were statistically significant. So we can determine that this feature was actually causing this specific lift and dip in these metrics that we care about. Anything highlighted in black here is where our platform is still obviously showing you the percentage change in that given metric, but perhaps there was a ton of noise in the data. You can see here the error margin is plus or minus 70.5%. So even though the overall, on average, there might have been a change in a given metric, if the error margin or if there's a ton of noise in the data, we're not going to be able to determine that there was true causation coming from a given feature. And of course, we're also telling you if we need more data to be able to determine if a result is statistically significant. What this is really giving you then is that full 360-degree dashboard where you're able to go ahead and get to that true causal impact, truly able to understand how this new onboarding flow is moving the needle, or really not moving the needle in some cases, on the metrics that you care about, so you can make a truly educated decision about how to think about rolling this feature out, if you need to kill it for now, if you need to revamp it, and also how can this inform your future product roadmap, right? As we move towards a world where you're doing MVP development, okay, you might have thrown out this first iteration of that flow, and you've seen some results. How do we need to revamp it, go back to the drawing board, and make changes to how we think about scoping the roadmap for that onboarding flow for our customers now that we have this true data about the causal impact of this feature? So, as I mentioned earlier, this is just one example of a given feature. If we were to go to any other split within the platform, we would see the same metrics dashboard coming up. And what that means, and really why the webinar is titled How to A/B Test Every Feature Release, is that every single feature that you roll out through our platform automatically then becomes an experiment where you're able to measure the impact of that given feature on all the metrics that you care about. So guys, that's where I'll generally pause for that demonstration of our platform. At this point, we'd be happy to go ahead and go through some questions. Thank you for the time today. If this has been interesting to the team, to you or your team, obviously Split has a 14-day free trial, so feel free to go ahead and sign up. It's just split.io/signup. And obviously we look forward to chatting with you.
Great, thanks, Kevin. We do have a few questions from the audience. The first one that came in is, are metrics usually UI-driven or path-through app-driven?
So honestly, I think the metrics can be seen really all across, right? The whole point here is that this is a full dashboard, just as a call-out, that it's not just sort of anything that's on the UI. It can be anything that's full stack, as well as those production KPIs that you care about, like load time or the number of 500 errors. So I would say the metrics 100% should be driven via the UI, but the whole beauty of our platform is that you're going to be able to measure every single metric that you care about on one experiment, and that you're going to see that impact across all the different metrics that you might care about. So it doesn't just have to be limited to the UI. So I would say yes, I'd say yes to both, and then you should be doing both within our platform.
Great. Another question. How does the software know about the user location to deliver A/B tests per user location? Does it use the information from the data center?
Yeah, so the way we've architected our platform is that within the UI, all that's happening is you're defining a key value pair that you want our SDK to match on for you at runtime. So as I mentioned, that SDK actually sits at the application layer of your code base, and you're simply asking it at runtime, hey, given this user, what version of the feature should they see? When you say given this user, you're just passing that information to us. So this user would be, this is their ID, this might be their location. The SDK will just use that information and match it against the key value pair you defined in the UI to make that computation and make that decision for you directly at runtime. The reason we've architected our platform in this manner is that this allows you to slice and dice by any dimension of your customer base that matters to you, such as location or their last login, how much they're spending with you, right? But you never actually have to share that information with us, because all that information is actually just being used directly at runtime within your application.
Okay, next question. How is the integration with API gateways like AWS?
So, as I mentioned, our SDK and our platform generally sits at the application layer of the code base. So we sit sort of higher up in the stack. And we generally like to think of ourselves from a CI/CD perspective, sitting post that whole deployment process, right? That's why we talk about separating the concept of code deploy from our feature release. And so when you're leveraging our platform, of course you want to use Split in terms of testing out different versions of your features in a pre-prod environment. But then once you've deployed everything into production, so that's where Split really starts to shine, because you've deployed out different versions of your feature, but you're able to dynamically control them through our UI, just because that information is automatically being used by our SDKs. So generally speaking, we wouldn't integrate directly with your AWS environment, right? You wouldn't be sort of, say, deploying different servers, different services with Split. It's more at the application layer is where you'd be leveraging us to serve up different pieces of functionality or different versions of your functionality within one branch and within one deployment of your application.
Great, thanks, Kevin. This is another one. How focused should the metrics be for testing?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I think the metrics really extend beyond there's sets of metrics, and there's some great papers here by Microsoft and the experimentation team, which I would refer the group to, around how to categorize metrics. We wrote a book on experimentation where we talked about some of these frameworks. Some of them are, there's one framework around HEART, which is happiness, engagement, retention, tasks, and starting to understand both those metrics that are particular to the experiment. So in the case we talked about earlier, starring, we were looking at particular metrics to understand engagement of that particular experiment or that particular split. But there were a series of metrics underneath the hood that were not necessarily relevant for that particular experiment, but we consider them as a company to be guardrail metrics. Those metrics are things like page load times. In our case, how often are splits being edited? Are people being invited to the product? Those are metrics that we look at across all of our experiments to ensure that they are moving within bounds that we're comfortable with. but then there are metrics that are particular to the experiment that you're releasing, and some of those may in fact be engagement with that particular or retention, but there is that layer that spans across your entire product.
Thanks, Trevor. Another question is pretty easy one, I think, for you guys. It's what's the best way for me to get started with Split?
I'd say definitely sign up for that trial, and as soon as you do that, our team will be reaching out. If you ever just want to reach out to us directly, hello@split.io is a great email alias where a number of our teammates are monitoring as well.
Great, thanks guys. I think we've answered most of the questions. Ryan, I will turn it back over to you.
All right, great. Well, I'd like to thank Jason, Trevor, and Kevin for a great presentation today. I'd also like to thank today's sponsor, Split Software, for providing the DZone audience with a great webinar. And lastly, thank you to everyone who joined us for today's presentation. We hope you learned something new today that will help you in your developer career. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.